I'd like to discuss my thoughts and feelings about archtop guitars. Are they worth having still? Are they worth using? What are the pros and cons about using archtops? If you're new around here, my name is Jamie Holroyd and I also have a free beginner jazz guitar guide. So if you're actually looking to get started with jazz guitar, then you don't need an archtop. What you need is a guide, and I've put one together, a completely free course which you can check out using the link below. So let's get into the archtop guitar. Is it the end of them? What are my thoughts? Let's get into the video. Let's begin with a few positives about archtop guitars. So the first point that I've got on my list is when you have one of these in your hands and you play one, you know, for the most part, you feel like you've got something that has taken longer than a day to put together. You think a bolt-on neck guitar like a Fender or whatever, they're amazing, and I love Telecasters, as you probably know if you watch this channel. But, you know, when you have something like this, you just kind of feel like you can't kind of just put this together in one day. Maybe you can, I don't know, but it just at least feels like there's something. Maybe it's kind of a mental effect or a psychological effect, but there's something kind of more substantial about an archtop guitar. You know, like I said, maybe it's more psychological, but I think most of you probably agree that when you have one of these in your hands, you know, it feels like a proper guitar, at least in jazz situations. So that's my first point, is you know, you kind of feel like you've got an instrument. And especially, you know, if you look at some of these beautiful handcrafted archtop guitars, or, you know, some really beautiful high-end archtop guitars, then you think, wow, you know, you can almost get motivated to part with a great deal of cash to have something that feels so nice in your hands. Where, you know, this is, at least in my opinion, if you have, you know, a Fender that's well into four figures, then you kind of think, you know, how much do these differ from something that costs maybe $500? You know, that's what I think sometimes when I've got a Fender in my hands. Obviously, you know, I have owned some expensive Fenders and stuff as well, but, you know, at least with an archtop or even a nice acoustic, you feel that there is a justification for those higher price tags sometimes. The second pro about archtop guitars is the look and the feel. Now, you know, if I hold this to camera, you know, it's a really kind of eye-catching guitar, isn't it? You know, it's the one that whenever you take this to gigs, people will come and say to you, oh, that guitar sounds really nice. Usually compliments always go to the guitar rather than the player. Even if you're playing exactly the same thing on like a telly or something like that, this guitar just kind of has that factor about it, doesn't it? And, you know, when people see it, then they kind of tend to associate it with, you know, more of a professional jazz guitar player, maybe. So yeah, it's the look of a jazz guitar, and certainly the feel as well. You know, you can't deny that there are certain properties about an archtop guitar that does make it different from a solid body guitar, even though, you know, solid bodies can sound really warm and really fat, and you can put, you know, good jazzy strings on them and, you know, nice pickups and stuff. You've got this kind of mix on a guitar like this. I mean, this specific guitar is my Yamaha AE 1200 that I've been using for years. You've probably seen this on the channel loads of times, but it's kind of fundamentally the concept of an archtop guitar, you know, based off a mandolin, is kind of the archtop, of course, but also the combination of an acoustic and an electric guitar. The reason why I was telling you the name of this guitar, I don't know if that comes up on camera, but it's called an AE 1200, is that the A stands for acoustic and the E stands for electric. So it's half acoustic. You can easily play this acoustically, and then you can roll on the volume and get an electric sound as well. So it does what it says on the tin. It's half acoustic, half electric. You can kind of, you know, sit here playing and practicing acoustically, without waking anybody up. And then if you need to kind of play at a jam session or a gig, you know, you can have as much sound as you want on the electric side of things. And it gives you kind of that warm sound as well. And I do find, you know, generally most archtop guitars always sound really warm, you know, from the get-go. Whereas, you know, some Fenders and stuff, you've got to kind of do a few mods and kind of win them over a little bit. But even when you play an Archtop guitar with the tone and the volume controls all the way up, it still sounds, warm and fat. It never sounds kind of thin and brittle or anything like that. And one of my favourite sounds from an Archtop guitar is that kind of hybrid acoustic electric sound. I love the sound when you get maybe a mic, in front of the 12th fret or on the F-fulls, and you have it plugged into a nice warm amp, and then you have the blend of both, and you're playing, solo guitar, and you add a nice little bit of reverb and stuff. It can really give you a beautiful kind of sweet sound, which is hard to get with a solid body guitar. So certainly the sound of them, it can really be something that is attractive about them. That being said, when I get more onto the cons, I'll go more about some of the cons with them as well. But in regards to the actual pros of the sound, for me personally, it's when you're playing in duos, or when you're playing solo, or sometimes if you're just kind of playing like what I am now, then you feel like the Archtop's almost got your back a little bit more, especially in a duo, because you tend to have bigger strings. They seem to produce bigger sounds. Sometimes if you're playing a solid body in a duo or something like that, and it's got kind of lighter strings on and a smaller sound, you can really feel like you're playing, that your sound is smaller. Whereas with an Archtop, I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody else, but you always feel like you've got kind of a bigger sound when you're playing in a smaller group. The more musicians you add in, I think, the properties and all the things that make Archtops great become kind of less so when you're playing in bigger, louder bands, which I'll get onto in just a second. I think the last point why Archtops are still relevant is because people always want what their heroes play. So, if you think about some of the biggest jazz guitar names, like Wes Montgomery, Charlie Christian, Tal Farlow, Barney Kessel, Herb Ellis, all these guys were kind of associated with Archtop jazz guitars, and people like Wes and George Benson and players like that, they will never go out of fashion. These are kind of like the classic jazz guitar players that everyone, no matter how kind of new to jazz you are or how young you are, will always have some appreciation for these. And certainly everyone always wants whatever guitar their heroes have. I think I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious about L5s because of Wes, and of course Wes, we all know that lots of Wes's sound was in his thumb, really, and he played a few other guitars throughout his career and he always sounded good. But there's just something about all the pictures and all the kind of info and the association with Wes and the L5, almost like Grant Green with the 330 or Ted Green with the Telecaster. Even if it's subconscious, even if it's psychological, there is always that kind of thing that you want what your heroes play. And most jazz guitar players do play Archtops, at least most of the classic Archtop jazz guitar players played Archtops. To keep these points balanced, let's have a look at some of the cons of using Archtop guitars, because there are a few cons to these. As great as they are, there are plenty of jazz guitar players that use solid bodies, that use semi-hollow bodies, and obviously there must be some reason why Gibson stopped making them. Of course, there are other companies, both boutique kind of companies and companies like Eastman that obviously still make them now. But Gibson's kind of one of the top 3 guitar brands, so there must be some reasons. Now, the first one that I think is because they can be bulky or they can be uncomfortable. If you look at that, that's a big piece of guitar to have on your lap, and this one isn't particularly heavy or anything like that. It's got a good weight to it, but it's just kind of the aesthetics, especially I think if you're holding a guitar in this position, it really feels like there's kind of a chunk on your lap, which some people might like that, obviously, and it does feel nice in some ways. Personally speaking, if I'm doing lots of lessons back to back, or if I'm playing a gig, after a while it can start to kind of feel a little bit heavy, a little bit intrusive on you in comparison to, say, a Telecaster. And of course, if you're constantly putting your guitar up and bringing it back down again, it's just kind of a bigger mass of guitar to move compared to a Telecaster, which you can very comfortably pick up with one hand and everything like that. So yeah, they can be a little bit cumbersome is the word in comparison to, say, a Telecaster or something like that. And some people, you know, this isn't really myself because I've, you know, been playing Archtops now for a long time and I really like them. But some people never get used to them, you know, especially players that have played on solid bodies for a while. One amazing jazz guitar teacher that I had, he was really into Strats and Tellys and stuff, and he could just never get used to kind of playing Archtops. That is, I think, one reason or one con to an Archtop is that they are not always as comfortable as some smaller guitars. A follow-on point to that is that they are not easy to transport, really. Of course, you can buy, you know, kind of padded gig bags and stuff like that, but most of these guitars come with hard cases, and that might be because of the set neck or the angle of the headstock. I'm not entirely sure, but most Archtop guitars come with hard cases, so you then have to go and buy a padded case. And if you're, you know, kind of on the smaller side of collecting like what I am, then that means you've got to have a big bulky hard case and a padded case, and you know, if you don't go out and play much, then you know you've got kind of a lot of the space being wasted to this, where obviously if you've got, you know, a Telly or a Strat, most people that go and use those just kind of take them in kind of padded gig bags and stuff like that. And even then, even when they're in their cases, they're much bigger and much bulkier to kind of carry around than what you know, a Telecaster is. And there's been lots of times where I'm playing out and I'm thinking, wow, if I just, you know, take my Telecaster, put that in my gig bag and, you know, get an amp in the other hand, then I can, you know, go from my car and just have everything done in one trip. Whereas if I've got this in a hard case, an amp, if I need a music stand or some music or anything else, then it's not as quick, you know, to transport as basically what a solid body guitar is. So that would be the second kind of con, I think, to using Archtop guitars. The second con is that Archtop guitars are generally one-trick ponies and not very versatile, which is generally not a massive point for me. You know, I'm 99% a jazz guitar player, and most of the stuff that I do is always on the neck pickup and everything like that. So it's not too bad, but for the odd occasion where you do need, and obviously for some of you this might be important, if you need a good blues sound, if you just want to kind of play jazz on a different pickup or anything like that, then, you know, they don't really do that for a couple of reasons. And one is that we generally, for these to work right and sound good, we generally like heavier strings. So, you know, things like bends and stuff like that become much harder to do if you're into that kind of music. And another reason is that, you know, even when you've got two pickups, the bridge pickup on Archtops, I don't think ever blows anybody away. You know, if you think about most of the kind of classic electric sounds, no one's ever raving about how good a bridge pickup on an L5 sounds or anything like that. They don't sound bad, and I think maybe in rockabilly or something they can sound okay. But, you know, it's just kind of a very much a one-trick pony in comparison to, say, having a Telecaster, and obviously on a bridge pickup of the Telecaster you can play almost anything, or a 335 for that matter could do the same. So, you know, they're a bit of a one-trick pony. So for me, it doesn't really matter if I've got a two pickup or a one pickup jazz guitar. They're both kind of one sound, really, because the bridge pickup's not too great. There are some kind of theories that having two pickups changes the sound, you know, because obviously you've got less wood, haven't you, because you've got a second hole carved in. And I've also heard that the second pickup can stop feedback as well, which I guess could be true in live situations. This guitar is really not bad for feedback, but I always sit with the amp to my left of me anyway, so that the amp and the body are not close, so I never really have any problems with feedback. And that, of course, is another con of using Archtop guitars, is that whenever you take them out, even though I've generally always been fine with this jazz guitar, it's kind of always at the back of your mind. You know, like I said, I always want to sit with the amp there and the guitar here, whereas, you know, if you're playing in a smaller kind of crowded place or a venue, then it's nicer just to be able to set things up at whatever side of you you want and not have it make any difference. But there is always kind of in the back of your mind, if you're taking an Archtop guitar and you're playing with a drummer you don't know, or if you're playing a depth gig or something like that, if it's going to be loud, then it could always kind of feedback, really. And, you know, when you are playing louder, as I said earlier on, the beautiful kind of things that make Archtop sound good become much less apparent, I think, when you're playing louder and things like that in a louder band, then, you know, I almost sometimes prefer kind of different guitars because they have a bit more cut through. They can sound a little bit muddy if you're playing. You know, of course, if you've got a really good kind of tasteful rhythm section that you're playing with, it's not so much of a problem, really. And of course, this is one of the things that makes this guitar sound so good. You know, you almost, like I said before, always get a jazzy sound in an archtop. You get humbuckers and put them in a, you know, a Les Paul or something, or a solid body jazz guitar. They sound like humbuckers in a solid body guitar. The sound that you hear with an archtop is not just the pickup like it is in a solid body guitar. It's, you know, the sound of the body being picked up by the magnets in the pickup as well. So there is kind of a beautiful thing to that, but it becomes much less apparent when you're playing at higher volumes. So, do I think this is the end of Archtop guitars? I don't think so. You know, I think that they're, you know, maybe less popular than what they were 30 or 40 years ago or anything like that. But I think that there's still people that like them and use them, especially kind of jazz guitar players that play kind of on that classic side of things, you know, and obviously, you know, players that don't do that as much will, you know, just get an instrument that suits effects and playing louder and stuff for obvious reasons. So I think they'll kind of continue to be used and desired by electric guitar players, but I'd love to know what your thoughts are. So please share them in the comment section below and let me know what you thought of this video. If you want more videos like this, then please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching.